Great. So I can see some of you are ready and watching us already at a slightly later time. So we are going to dive straight on in because there is literally so much I would like to discuss and go over with Zach. I'm trying super hard not to fangirl right now. So I'm glad you're all here as well. And then I don't just look like a crazy internet stalker that's pretended to have a group to interview you in. So today we're talking about trusting your words, poetry, Savasana, and more with the fabulous Zach Beach, who can introduce himself in a moment. But he is the author. He can interview himself as well. So it's an epic podcast I've been binging on. But he is the author of this book, which is 108 Savasana Poems, Blissful Words from the Heart of Yoga. And trust me, they are blissful. I was actually gifted this book and it is just so very special. But Zach, my love, aside from having felt like I've read your heart in this, I really don't know you. So it'd be delightful if you could just introduce us to the group, say a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say thank you so much for having me on. It just warms my heart so much to see you holding the book and that my words have resonated with you. So thank you so much. I'm calling in from sunny California, from the San Francisco Bay Area. I also teach and love this practice of yoga. I'm fortunate enough to be at home before I do some more summer travels to teach yoga in Central and South America. And just like you, I'm a human being discovering the spiritual aspects of life and breathing into my heart and the work that I do in the world.
And your work is so diverse because you're a yoga teacher like us, but obviously you're a poet and an author as well. And you have your podcast, which I'll share a link to because I have been binging on it all week and it is really good. It's the Learn to Love podcast. Yeah, Learn to Love podcast.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you're teaching within that.
It's interesting to hear you describe my work as diverse because that to me describes the power of intention, because I think of my work as being quite simple. It's all about love. I feel like my purpose in this life is to bring more love into the world. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. And this is why we as teachers, we try to live with intention because of how open how that opens us up to a world of possibilities, right? A goal is some future point in the future we have to meet, but setting an intention, there's so many different ways we can bring that into today. We can bring that into our life. So I think of my work in the world as focused on one thing, which is love. So yoga teaching offers me an opportunity every day to tell people to open their hearts. And I think, move your shoulders or your ribs in a certain way, but it's just a lovely opportunity to slide in all those loving messages for people to love themselves, to join together and practice in community in the Sangha, in the Kula. So thank you.
This definitely wasn't a question I'd planned, but it's where we're going. What first opened your eyes to that beautiful truth that we are love? We are born knowing love. We don't learn to love. Was it yoga that opened that to you first or something else?
It was yoga. Absolutely. Yoga has really been a key and essential part of my path since the beginning. And that's, to me, a key part of the spiritual path, and what yoga or meditation or any spiritual practice really encourages is us to look within, to think about what truly matters, what we truly value most in life, and how to live in line most with those values. So it's really crazy to me that before I discovered yoga, no one ever told me to listen to my breath. No one ever told me to explore the mystery as my own psyche. I was told that to gain knowledge in this world, you have to find external sources of information through books and education and degrees, and not to diminish the power of, say, self-study, as we know, one of the ethical precepts. But no one ever really taught me this world of interiority as I like to call it, or that our inner space is just as vast as outer space. And yoga really has been that key tool for me that gives me the opportunity every day to practice on clearing the mind, opening the heart, calming the body, and discovering something that goes beyond that continuous movement of thinking.
Mhm. That brings me on to a question I was going to ask you, actually. Is one of the things I love most about, first of all, your poetry, first of all, this book, but also listening to your podcast, is you said about external knowledge, and you are clearly so well read in the spiritual teachings. You know, so well read in Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and those lessons ooze through your work. I read your work and I feel those teachings, but they come through in a completely different new way to me. They come through your language, your experience, your felt sense, and I hear them differently. And, you know, our topic today is trusting your words. How do you navigate that balance as a teacher in honoring the ancient, powerful lineage of these texts and your own experience, insight, words?
Yeah, it's so lovely because there are these little Easter eggs like in the poems, like the titles or something that I'm like, okay, the casual person isn't going to know what this means, but a yoga teacher might. Like, I think one of the titles is Choyambakam Yajamahe, which is that long mantra, Sungandim Pushti Vardhanam. But to go to your question, I do think that when you do look at the wisdom teachings, there is this deep encouraging not to just take it as its word, right? So Chogyam Trungpa described wisdom teachings as like being handed raw metal, and it's up to you to shape it and pummel it and work it in a way so that then you can wear it as a nice necklace. Right. Or the Buddha has that phrase that I love, ehipassiko, which means see for yourself. Don't take anybody else's word for it, no matter how sacred the scripture is, no matter if someone says this is the divine word of God put on paper, it's still up to you to verify with your own personal lived experience. And that to me is really key to any wisdom teaching, that we do have to make it real for ourselves. We do have to verify it for ourselves with our own internal experience. So it's meant to be digested. It's meant to be tested. And I do share these wisdom teachings, like in teacher trainings, for example, and it's really amazing to see where people's resistance to it lies. So what I mean by that is these teachings have been shared for thousands of years, and I'm just passing it along, right? I don't even think of like us as teaching yoga. We're just conduits. We're just sharing yoga that has been shared for many centuries. And you might share some wisdom teaching, like just basic idea, like love everyone, right? So someone hears this and they're like, everyone? What about what about the murderers or the pedophiles? Or what about my really annoying coworker? Like it could be anyone. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is these teachings are truth, and it's any resistance that you experience to them, that's your opportunity for growth. That resistance is pointing out exactly where you are stuck. So when we tune into this basic idea of, say, unconditional love and to love everyone, and you're like, ugh, but what about that thing that I am struggling the most to love? Well, that's it. That is your opportunity for growth. That is your opportunity to look at what is the obstacle that's preventing the truth from permeating your being.
And then on obstacles with that, when I shared what the topic was today, there's a few teachers I know well and adore who've put in the comments, I'm really struggling to trust my words at the moment. So that's their obstacle. Their obstacle is actually in that trusting their own words at the moment. So what would your advice be for starting that journey of deep love and respect for the spiritual teachings, noticing where your resistance is? But what if the obstacle is in trusting your words and clinging to the how the teachings have been given to you?
So you're almost like in the context of I'm teaching yoga and I'm
Mm,
not necessarily sure about the words that I'm using.
mm,
Well, it's interesting because there's another metaphor that you will often find in spiritual teachings, which is the basic idea that use a method until it no longer works for you or until it's completed its function, and then you can discard the method. So, one
mm,
metaphor is use a raft to cross a river. Once you get to the end, you don't need the raft anymore. If you
mm,
use a brick, I don't know. This is like a Zen story. So I'm like, we don't use bricks to knock on people's doors, but the Zen story, if you pick up a brick to knock on somebody's door, once the door is open, you can put away the brick.
mm.
So absolutely, when you're starting out teaching, starting out having trouble finding the words, okay, to stick to the script, right? Even Ashtanga yoga, Bikram yoga, we don't have to get into Bikram, but a lot of yoga is the same practice, same poses, same breath the entire time. You don't have to innovate on a millennial old tradition, not Bikram, but you don't have to innovate on a practice that's been there for a long time. So that's what's happened for me in my path, for example, is I love poetry. I love reading poetry. And I loved reading poetry, beginning of class, end of class, during Shavasana to close the class. So, of course, I started with other people's poems. I didn't just come out of nowhere and have my own words. So I was always looking for other poems, finding other poems, reading other poems, memorizing other poems. A lot of times people are like, how do you know all these poems off the top of your head? It's like, because I read them about 50 times
Mm,
in different classes in different contexts. And then that was the raft to get to the river, right? Is you start to explore how other artists have done it, how other people have done it throughout time. And then slowly, as you integrate the past, you can bring it with you into the future as you tap into your own truth and uh, change the situation to apply more to the audience that you are working with.
That's so beautiful. And that, yeah, it's just the journey I took. I remember when I started teaching, I clung to a Judith Hanson Lasseter book that was a
Mm.
quote a day. And I that is so tattered and falling apart. And at some point, I stopped picking it up. And I don't know when I stopped picking it up and trusting more in the words that came through me. But, you know, inside the Yoga Teacher Collaborative, we're often getting asked, can anyone recommend a poem? Can anyone recommend a poem? I'm teaching on this theme, on this theme. Can anyone recommend a poem? And sometimes I do like to say, yes, this, but but also, why don't you try and write a sentence? You know, do you think you have to start with even writing? Can you just sit in the moment and see what comes from your heart? Start with I mean, how did you go from reading other people's poems to having the confidence to publish a book of 108? And I know it's not your only one.
um I just love your energy, first of all. I want to take your yoga class sometime. I feel like it's just fun and such a joy. And you know, this is my third poetry collection. No, this is the second poetry collection of three. I just published a new one. And that's what it takes. It takes practice. Like it's a skill just like anything else. And that is another huge thing that yoga has taught me, that everything we value in life is a practice. Love, forgiveness, compassion, peace of mind, cultivating intimate relationships with others. These are all practices. And for me, writing is just a huge practice of mine. And for others, it can be something completely different, walking in nature, sculpture, painting, right? Different other practices that we do to really express the infinity that is within us, to bring it outside of us, to reflect the unique, blissful nature that we are. And there's a joke I sometimes tell in my trainings. It's kind of long, but I'll just say it really quick. A business leader is asked, what's the key to success? And he says, right decisions. And then he's like, okay, how do you get to right decisions? He says, experience. Okay, how do you get to experience? He says, bad decisions.
That's great.
Which is Which is not to say, so like I have a poetry mentor that I workshop poems with. I've gone to poetry
Mhm.
workshops, I've gone to writing conferences, right? It is really important at the beginning of your craft to have feedback, to have mentors, to have people that you work with, to refine whatever it is that you're putting out into the world.
Mm. Just beautiful to start to play, to practice, and to refine the work. And that is what we're doing when we come to yoga as a practice. Something that really resonated with me this week in one of your podcasts was you said, and you were talking about a spiritual teaching you had received, you said that spirituality is listening. And
Mm,
I thought that was a very beautiful, practical way for someone to start to explore a spiritual practice. But then my mind
mhm.
was musing about listening, spirituality, and poems. Because when I'm reading your poems, like when I'm reading to myself, I am listening to your words through reading them. And then when I take this to class, I am listening to my own voice, reading your poems, and there's going to be a different inflection, a different pace, a different pause, a different feeling to the poem because it's coming through how I felt it. And then we have our students who might be in Shavasana at that moment in their own energy and space, listening through their ears to my inflection, to your words. There's such a ripple of listening. And I know in the beginning of your book, you said, like, these are your babies. These poems are your babies. How do you feel through that ripple of so many layers of listening?
Hmm. I mean, it really warms my heart. Like just hearing your story, I'm not going to lie, makes me feel warm and fluffy inside. So I just so appreciate it. And that is, yeah, such a key lesson I have been exploring, thinking about spirituality as this art of listening and all the different ways we explore that in our life. Even just recently in my own yoga class, I was sharing this quote that we have to listen to our body's whispers now so we don't have to hear it yell later. And this is the general mode that people are in. We live from shoulders up, caught up in our own minds, stuck in our own thinking, we're not in touch with our bodies. And most people only become aware of their bodies when it's in pain, right? Oh, my leg hurts. Oh, I stubbed my toe on the coffee table. Oh, this body. It's always such a source of pain in my life. And yeah, yoga does allow this deep listening to the body. So we can say, oh, this is tight. I need to stretch it. Oh, this is weak. I need to strengthen it. So we don't have to hear it yell later. So we don't have to have intense pain and suffering later. Right. And you can easily see how quickly we can extrapolate that to all these other areas of your life. Right. So like listen to your heart's whispers now. So you don't have to hear it yell later. And maybe that means the relationship you're in right now isn't serving you. Listen to your purpose or your calling now so that 20 years don't fly by and you're wondering what you've done with your life, right? And don't have that pain and suffering later on. But I think one of the keyest pieces about listening that you are describing when you talk about I read and I listen, I speak in Shavasana and I listen, is how difficult listening is in general because of the continuous thinking of the mind. I had one teacher, John Prendergast, who just described the mind as like having a radio on and it's like static and it's on at all times. And you're trying to listen to somebody else, you're trying to listen to your body, and you can't hear it. You might be speaking to somebody and you're like, okay, I should really look like I'm listening right now. I should start nodding my head. I think they said something funny. I better laugh. Oh, I have a much better story, especially because it involves me. Like you're not even listening to the words that they're saying because your mind is going off. So that's one of the most key lessons I've learned is that in order to truly listen, we do have to calm the mind. We do have to turn the volume knob down of the static of our own mind in order to be present with another, in order to be present with ourselves, which is why Shavasana is such a beautiful, receptive, and open time to hear those messages that really stir the soul, that really tap us in to this essence of being human, because that's when the mind is finally at rest And I've been kind of blathering, but I just want to share this one story because I've been thinking about it because I recently started at this hot yoga studio. And I was like, yeah, I love to teach yin sometimes, restorative sometimes, because it's just so calming just to come and just breathe and stretch. And she's like, Zach, our students are stressed out. They have so much pent up energy. They need 50 minutes to get it out and then they can rest. So all those chaturangas, all those twists and turns and flips and inversions, those are all ways to just sweat out and stress out the stress of life. And then somebody's finally able to actually like relax and be at peace and discover the truth of their being.
That, yeah. And that is the challenge of yoga, isn't it? How do we sit in that stillness with the stuff rather than having to exhaust ourselves so we can't hear the stuff and then sit? In Shavasana, you clearly are a lover of Shavasana. And this is one of the things that really first struck me with this book, was you don't open it at page 1 and find a poem. You open it at page 1 and find a really long essay on Shavasana. And, you know, I run a teacher training as well. And I remember we do a whole module on Shavasana. And I remember looking through all of my textbooks, all the books, all the wisdom I had, all the books on teaching yoga. I've got a decent bookshelf. I went through all of my books and none of them had a chapter on Shavasana. And I rang a friend who teaches on it, Lauren. I was like, Lauren, go to your bookshelf. And she did the same, and nothing had a chapter on Shavasana. Yet you ask any yoga teacher, we'll all agree with exactly your opening words that Shavasana is the most important part of the practice. So we have new teachers in this group, we have very experienced teachers in this group. What is your wisdom on guiding Shavasana?
My first piece of advice is don't forget it. Especially nowadays, classes have gone from 2 hours to 90 minutes to 75 minutes. Now most classes are 60 minutes. People walk in with their Starbucks coffees and their phones and tech yoga every damn day, hashtag, slam their phone, slam their coffee. Okay, I'm ready. Give me the workout, give me the thing. And I have been to some classes where like Shavasana is like 30 seconds, 1 minute, right? And then I barely have enough time to get into it before the teacher's like, okay, time to go. Have a nice day, everyone. So even when I took my 200 hour, the general rule of thumb I had was that for every 30 minutes of class, you want about 5 minutes of Shavasana. So if you do have an hour-long class, you're looking at 10 minutes. If you have a 90-minute class, you're looking at some Shavasana, which is a pretty long time. So I definitely encourage you to carve that time out in your classes, even if they're the 6 a.m. boot camp. Really give your students time because it is that integration. To me, that's almost true yoga. We all know yoga means union. It's a linking together. It's a coming together. And it's not an action that you do. You're not like, okay, time to link together my heart and my mind. Time to link together my mind and my body, right? It's a natural process, like a flower that's blossoming, that we just have to create the space for it to happen. So it's that final letting go that lets the natural flow of life, the prana, the Tao, whatever you want to call it, flow through us and integrate us to make us whole. So that's really the first step. And there are, of course, different ways to guide somebody into Shavasana. The general rule of thumb that I follow, and you can expand it in different ways. Sorry. You can expand it in different ways, but you do physical relaxation, mental relaxation, spiritual relaxation. So physical, okay, relax the body. If you have 2 hours, do a 2-hour yoga nidra. Relax the right pinky. Take 2 hours to go around. But if you only have a bit of time, relax the legs, relax the torso, relax the arms, relax the face. Okay. So, and then you do the mental relaxation, right? Release the thoughts in the mind. You can add flowery imagery. I like to say, let your thoughts fly off into the distance like birds to reveal a vast and infinite blue sky, like whatever it is that you want. And then the spiritual relaxation, which I feel like is a good time for a Shavasana poem or just any final gem of wisdom to just plant in the open field of somebody's awareness
Mm.
and then leave them there, right? A lot of people want to keep talking, they want to play that amazing song that they have, but we need that silence, right? We need that stillness. I do think about that quote, few things resemble God as much as silence. Or I was just reading some mystical poetry and it was silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation.
Mm.
And as somebody who loves words, I recognize their
You are
um
powerful wordsmith. You
and that's
are.
the thing. Words are, in spirituality, teachings are described as the finger pointing to the moon, right? There's always a difference between the explained world and the experienced world. But I find poetry is that space between the finger and the moon. It takes you farther because it gets to play with the words and how they sound, and how they look, and how they feel in the body, and to use that really powerful tool of metaphor to take us closer to that light that's reflecting back at us.
I think that is 3 stages for Shavasana is beautiful. Obviously, we're very familiar with the physical relaxation, with relaxing the mind, but including that aspect of the spiritual relaxation is just beautiful. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the book, you split your book up into 4 sections of entry, absolution, awakening, and completion. Would you sort of use that as well as a structure? Tell me about those sort of 4 pillars for you.
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea of the structure of the book is that there are things you can do once people are getting into Shavasana, once people are in Shavasana, once people are waking out of Shavasana, and then once you're kind of closing the class, right? But you don't need to be so rigid necessarily. So, like, sometimes I might read a portion of the poem at the very beginning of class, kind of weave the theme throughout, and then finish the poem like towards the end of class, for example.
Your poems really lend themselves to that very well as well. I find sometimes I'll just take out a line or I'll just take out a paragraph. This is probably one of my favorite end paragraphs. It's like the last third of the non-dual. Everything is sacred, the softness of night, the turning of the page, and the stars always shining. Whether your eyes perceive them or not, trust the oceans to carry you. Believe in your internal, the shining diamond inside of you that retains the pure light of your divinity. And every line of that just sits on its own. I think it's my favorite.
Oh, thank you.
Cool. There was one little other nugget that landed from you in my world this week. You were talking about mindfulness and you were saying how it's a buzz term, but for you, when there's true mindfulness, there's no mind because you're in the heart. That was just like the biggest light bulb. Just beautiful. You have anything to add on that?
I have so many things to say about mindfulness, but I'm as a writer, I think we really have to be specific about what words that we use. And this particularly applies to translations. Like anytime we translate one word from another one, we got to be really specific. But sometimes it's really hard. So, for example, in Sanskrit, there isn't separate words for heart and mind. There isn't that bifurcation that we've created in the West, which makes it really hard anytime you talk about mind is you have to think, oh, you mean the Western view of mind, that this thing that's occurs in the 3-pound matter, a 3-pound chunk of matter in our head, or the Eastern mind that potentially can encompass everything. So sometimes I use the term heart mind, right, to recognize that we're talking about something much more encompassing than simply what the brain is able to encounter. But sometimes I just switch it and I either say heartfulness, we're trying to be heartful, meaning bringing our whole body, heart, and mind to this moment. But if I want to use the term mind, I call it remindfulness because it's that iterative, continuous coming back to the here and the now in this moment, and also reminding ourselves that we're here to love. I think mindfulness has turned into kind of, I call it like the Sudoku puzzle. Like it's turned into just an exercise of the mind. People use it to become more focused and productive in their work. But it's always been a combination of attention and intention. And people got the attention down, like, all right, I'm focusing the mind. I got my app. I'm going to press it. I'm going to meditate for 15 minutes. And sometimes I joke, I did my 30-minute meditation so well, I finished it in 10. Like people are just so on it. But they forget about the intention, which is always meant to be held in compassion. It's always meant to bring the heart with it. So it's not just attention, it's loving attention. It's not just mindfulness, it's heart mindfulness. It's not just this moment, it's always coming back to this moment and reminding ourselves what our intention is and to live from that intention. And then if we really want to get down to it, one final thing I'll say about mindfulness is it's one step of the eightfold path. So it's 1/8 of the path. And it's not just mindfulness, it's right mindfulness. If we get down to it, along with right view, right intention, right livelihood, it's right mindfulness. And I remember asking this monk about it, and he's like, yeah, you can really mindfully take a knife and stab it into somebody. And I was like, but that is not right mindfulness. So again, the rightness is the kindness, the compassion, the love, the seeing of our interconnectedness with all things.
That is amazing. Beautiful nuggets. Thank you so much. 2 little last questions, if I may. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
One, for those who are still feeling drawn to be sharing the beautiful poems written by others, any advice on actually reading a poem? We go over this in teacher training. So everything is sacred, the softness of the night, the turning of the pen, like actually in reading a poem. And any advice for someone that feels they would like to write and share their own poems in class?
So advice for those that want to write and share their own poems.
And advice on how to read a poem.
Advice on how to read a poem. There was a really nice, I had this teaching tool, and it's basically called the triangle of awareness. And it's basically like when you're teaching, what are you focusing on? And the 3 things are your audience, yourself, and the script. So what I mean by that is obviously when you're teaching asana, is you want all your attention on your students. You want to be looking at your students, modifying it. And it's a problem I see all the time in yoga teachers because it's really easy to face the wrong way, right? Like if you're in a forward fold, I'm like, don't teach to your legs. Teachers, teach to the class. Or child's pose, don't teach to the floor. You want to teach to the class. Because, I've seen classes where half the students are totally lost and the teacher doesn't even realize it because they're facing the wall, they're facing themselves, they're not looking in the direction of the students. So obviously during asana, you really want to have your attention on the students, maybe like 90%. During meditation, you want a lot of your focus within yourself, because you're conveying or trying to convey a certain state of mind that you yourself want to induce and want to share. All right. So I do recommend when you're teaching meditation, yeah, to have your eyes slightly closed rather than just staring at people and telling them to listen to their breath, right? So reading poetry is that really delicate combination of tuning into your own inner experience along with the words that it is that you're expressing. Because you are trying to basically communicate a state of mind or induce a state of mind in your students. So it will really help for you to also be in that state of mind.
Mhm.
So if it's a Savasana poem, for example, it's like, okay, find the stillness within you and then try to communicate in a way that doesn't disturb the stillness, but rather accentuates it.
Mm.
And I do feel like as long as we're talking about the power of words, there is this whole discipline known as mantra yoga, which is so fun to get into. I love teaching Sanskrit and getting into the vibrational qualities of these words. And just going into the yogic history, like we have chanting and the Vedas, which were heard by enlightened beings. And the basic idea is that if you chant those same mantras, you are aligning your own consciousness to that same state that those great rishis were in. So that's my long-winded answer to how to read some poems. And then
That
in
was
terms of
really
writing,
insightful. Definitely to sit like, and I have had people say, don't meditate when you're teaching meditation. And I'm like, I know, and I have to speak from that place of meditation when I'm teaching meditation, and to think of reading
exactly.
poetry as an extension of that is beautiful. And yeah, I know we have some budding poets in our group.
Yeah. So the first thing I say with writing is don't stop. So just free writing is a really, really wonderful way to begin to remove those blockages. A lot of people think they don't have anything to say. A lot of people are like, oh, I have to write something really profound. Just take pen to paper, set a timer for 15 minutes, and just write. And it might start out, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. And then eventually words come out. Right. And then once you have the words, it's how can I use these words to transform people's experience a little bit more? And that's where some study of the tools of poetry can be really helpful. Metaphor and simile and sibilance and assonance and different tasks like these. So it is a craft, and learning about the tools of the craft can really help you. There's a slogan I love and applies to so much, which is learn the rules really, really well so you know when and how to break them.
Mm,
So, like with yoga teaching, it's like, yeah, learn the three sun A's, three sun B's, learn the rules, how things are supposed to be done. And then it's up to you how you want to change it and to better meet whatever it is that you're trying to
mhm,
achieve. So, I find with writing as a craft is like learn the basic rules and then you can decide how you want to implement them in your own writing.
mm. Yes, thank you. That's a really, really good starting point for people. People that don't have your book, I will share a link. You know how much I highly recommend this book. I'll share a link to this and a couple of the others. I'll also share a link to the Learn to Love podcast, but I'll particularly start you off with my favorite one. I'll share a link to that, which is the one where it's more you speaking rather than so much of an interview. But do you have any online courses, anything else, someone that wants to actually learn directly from you? And California's a little bit far.
Yes, California is far. I do have a lot of online materials. Of course, you can get any of my books online. My name is Zach Beach. ZachBeach.com is a good place just to explore all of my offerings. I'm not teaching any online classes right now, but as you mentioned, I do have this Learn to Love podcast, which has been super fun. I do have these books. I do have a couple audio courses. I even have a blog that you can read for free if you know if the book is out of your price range. I know it's hard sometimes as a yoga teacher to earn a living these days, but keep doing it. The world needs yoga and love and connection now more than ever. And plane tickets are not can be bought with credit card points. And I do lead teacher trainings around the world. So even this summer, I'm doing 200 hour in Peru in June, and then Mexico in July. And I'll be part of a 300 hour also in December. So if some of your audience is already teaching, then they can look at the 300 hour, which will be in Guatemala. So if you ever make it this side of the water, there's amazing places to explore in the world as well. So
have you ever thought of an online poetry workshop for yoga teachers? Have you ever led such a thing?
I haven't done one, but I appreciate the suggestion. It's a good idea. I should do it.
Great, I'll sign straight up. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. As when I listen to you, when I read you, there is just nuggets coming out all the time, and in such beautiful words that just hit my heart in a very different way. So thank you so very much for sharing with us today, and for inspiring so many yoga teachers you don't even know. Just going to see if someone sent me a message today. Let me just see if I can. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find it. So
well, I just want to say thank you, Laura. You have such a lovely, light, open-hearted energy. It's just been so lovely to connect with you.
No, I can't find the message, but she's a baby massage teacher, and she said she reads it to the she reads your poems to the baby.
What?
So I wonder if I can find it, I'll tell you more. But yeah, right into the ears of babes it's going.
That's awesome.
Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.